Mom didn't even wait for the room to settle. She lifted her glass in front of the entire Thanksgiving table and said something so sharp it sliced straight through the noise. She announced Emily would get the insurance money because I didn't need it. No whisper, no hesitation, just a public verdict handed down like I wasn't family at all. Forks stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the candles seemed to flicker differently. I kept my face still, but inside, something finally locked into place. Before I take you into that moment, tell me where are you watching from, and when you hear the rest, tell me what you would have done. My name is Chloe, and for as long as I can remember, I've learned to move quietly through rooms my own family filled. Not because I'm timid, but because quiet lets you see everything people think they've hidden. It's the kind of instinct you grow when you have a mother like mine, someone who adores control as much as she adores my younger sister, Emily. Emily, if you haven't guessed already, is the sun in my mother's sky. She's 2 years younger than me, sweet, when she wants to be a little fragile after her recent divorce, and right now living back at Mom's house. Every decision in that home bends toward her. It always has. Growing up, she got the celebrations, the attention, the soft explanations. I got the responsibility and the paperwork. Paperwork. That word has followed me longer than any memory. When I was 19, Mom handed me a stack of update forms insisting it was just routine government stuff, nothing important. I signed because I trusted her. But I'll never forget the small logo in the corner, something I only recognized years later when I was filing my own documents in Denver, an insurance company. That moment stayed with me like a bruise under the skin, unseen, but impossible to pretend away. Life in Denver gave me space. I work in analysis, the kind of job that trains you to follow timelines, spot inconsistencies, and pay attention when someone dodges a detail. It made me sharper, steadier, better at understanding motives. But nothing prepares you for your own family. When Mom called about Thanksgiving this year, her voice was too bright, too rehearsed. She told me the whole extended family would be at Aunt Carol's house in Seattle. Cousins, older relatives, people who love drama more than dessert. Mom said she had important news to share and wanted everyone present. That alone was strange. She usually avoids making announcements unless they make her look good. Aunt Carol's house has always been neutral ground, big kitchen, long wooden table, warm lighting. The kind of place where you expect peace, not cross-examination. When I arrived that evening, she hugged me first, stepping back to look at me the same way she always has, like I grew into someone she secretly expected I would be. My cousins chatted around the kitchen island, and Uncle Mike was already telling stories too loudly in the next room. It all felt familiar, except for one thing. Mom's hands kept fluttering, smoothing her sweater, adjusting her necklace, trying to look confident while failing terribly. Emily walked in a little later. She smiled when she saw me, and I smiled back, even though something in her eyes looked tired, like she was holding up too much on too little sleep. She has never been cruel to me, just easily influenced, especially by Mom. As we took our seats at the table, I felt it, the shift in the air, the tension lurking under the clatter of plates. Something was coming. Something Mom wasn't ready for me to see clearly, but I already had the truth folded quietly inside my phone. Dinner had barely begun when the first crack in the evening showed itself. It came in the form of a too casual comment from Mom, the kind meant to slip past most people unnoticed. But I've spent years listening between her words. I felt it land like a pebble thrown into still water. She said something about finally getting things processed, then quickly changed the subject. Emily looked up confused, but Mom didn't meet her eyes. That was the first red flag. The second came 10 minutes later when my cousin, who hears everything, leaned over and whispered, "Your mom seems off tonight." I pretended to shrug, but I'd noticed it too. Mom wasn't eating. She kept glancing at Emily, and every time someone mentioned finances or paperwork, her shoulders tensed. Under the table, I lifted my phone just enough to unlock it with my thumb. The email from the insurance company sat where it had for days waiting. A review notice, pending investigation, documents under verification. Everything politely worded, but unmistakable. They were looking into the claim Mom had filed. I didn't open the message fully, there was no need. I already knew every line. Emily, meanwhile, was slowly realizing something didn't add up. She leaned closer and whispered, "Did Mom say something to you about money?" Her voice trembled on the last word. Emily may be the favored child, but she isn't a liar. She has never been able to hide confusion, and right now her face was practically spelling it out. "No," I said quietly. "Why did she tell you something?" She shook her head. "She just keeps saying she has a surprise. But I don't know anything about insurance." Insurance. The word felt heavier than it should, like metal in my mouth. That was red flag number 3. Around us, the table buzzed on forks, scraping chairs, shifting. Uncle Mike was dissecting some story from his job. My older relatives debated football. Aunt Carol kept passing dishes with her usual warmth. No one knew the ground under our feet was already cracking, but I could feel it, something old and ugly, rising. Then Mom did it again. She leaned forward and told a story about how hard the past year had been for Emily, her voice thick with sympathy. She never mentioned the divorce directly, but she didn't have to. She painted Emily as someone fragile, someone deserving, someone who needed, well, exactly what she was planning to give her. That was the moment I recognized the tone. I'd heard it 10 years ago in our old kitchen when she slid those update forms across the counter and told me to sign quickly before she forgot. I hadn't understood then, but I understood now. Her guilty voice always dipped, like she was stepping around broken glass only she could see. And tonight her steps were loud. I folded my napkin slowly, buying myself a few seconds. The truth was already in motion. Mom was unraveling thread by thread, and no one at this table knew what was about to hit. Except me. By the time she lifted her glass to make her announcement, I wasn't shocked. I was ready. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It came in small fractures, quiet, undeniable, and perfectly visible to anyone paying attention. Mom raised her glass again, trying to regain the control she always assumed she had, but her voice slipped on the first word. It was subtle, almost nothing, but to me it sounded like a crack starting in the center of glass. She cleared her throat, tried again, and this time forced a smile that didn't match her eyes. Before we get too deep into dinner, she said I wanted to acknowledge everything Emily has been through. Her gaze swept dramatically toward my sister, who blinked in startled confusion. She deserves something good, a fresh start. Emily's fork paused midair. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Mom didn't answer her. She went on like she was reading from a script, only she had rehearsed. "Life hasn't been fair to her," she added, softening her tone for sympathy. "So when the opportunity came, I did what any mother would do. I made sure she'd be taken care of. It was a carefully placed line, a justification dropped before the truth. And it wasn't meant for Emily at all. It was meant for the audience. But the audience wasn't on her side anymore." Aunt Carol's eyebrows sharpened. My cousin stopped eating, and Uncle Mike leaned back as if giving the conversation space to combust. Even the older relatives who usually supported Mom out of habit watched her with a kind of cautious curiosity. Emily whispered again, louder this time, "Mom, what opportunity?" There it was, the first real collapse. Mom tried to hold the line. "It's complicated," she muttered, waving her hand in a gesture that used to shut people down. "It didn't work, not tonight." Emily frowned, staring at her like she was seeing her for the first time. "What did you do? I could have spoken then. I could have laid everything on the table. But revenge, real revenge, the kind that doesn't break you, with it, requires restraint. So I stayed quiet and let the silence work for me." Mom panicked in the silence. She looked at me, next wrong move. "Chloe, you understand, right? You know Emily needs help. This isn't a big deal." There was the second collapse, her attempt to drag me into her story. She expected me to nod like I had at 19 signing paperwork I didn't understand. Instead, I looked at her calmly. "Why don't you explain it to everyone?" Her breath hitched. Barely noticeable, but enough. The table shifted emotionally, not physically. People leaned in, a collective inhalation. Mom's voice sharpened. "There's nothing to explain." Her hands, however, told the real story. They shook. Emily stared at them, then at me. "Chloe," she whispered, "did Mom file something for Dad's policy?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence was its own truth. Aunt Carol finally spoke, her tone firm but steady. If there's something going on, this is the time to say it. Not after sneaking around behind your daughters. Mom snapped back. I wasn't sneaking, but she was, and everyone knew it. The entire room tilted toward confrontation. Mom was cornered, but I wasn't done letting her reveal herself. I breathed out slow. We can talk about it, I said, but we should talk about what was filed, and by who. Mom's face drained of color. The pushback had begun, not loud, not cruel, but precise. And for the first time in years, she realized she wasn't the only one who knew how paperwork worked. It happened fast, but not in a chaotic way, more like a curtain lifting on a stage where everyone had unknowingly taken their positions. Mom stood still, clutching her glass, and the entire table seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to say something that could stitch the evening back together. But the thread was already too thin, too frayed. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. So I stood instead. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't require volume. It only needs the right moment. And this was mine. Mom. I said, keeping my tone steady, why don't you tell them who filed the claim? Every sound vanished. Forks froze mid-air. A chair squeaked as someone leaned back in slow disbelief. Even the warmth from the kitchen seemed to stall. Across the table, Emily's eyes widened. Filed what? The question came out louder than she intended, sharp, startled, almost frightened, and it cut straight through whatever thin control Mom was trying to maintain. Mom whipped her head toward her Emily, not now. But Emily stood too, her chair scraping loudly across the wood floor. No, I want to know what she's talking about. What claim? Her voice cracked on the last word. Mom's lips trembled. She looked at me with something between warning and desperation. Chloe, stop being dramatic. You're misunderstanding. I'm not, I said softly. And you know I'm not. Aunt Carol placed her hand on the table. She wasn't raising her voice, but her presence had always commanded honesty. I think we all deserve to know what's going on. Mom swallowed hard. It's just paperwork. Nothing serious. That word again, paperwork. The same word she'd used when I was 19. The same word she always used when she needed one daughter to be silent and the other to be blind. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands didn't shake. Hers did. I didn't want to do this tonight, I said, but since you've decided to involve everyone, they should hear the truth too. Mom's eyes went wide. Chloe. I tapped the screen and opened the message I'd read a dozen times over the past 2 weeks. The subject line alone was enough to hush every doubt. Pending review, claim investigation. I didn't read every line out loud. There was no need, but I read the parts that mattered. It says, I began the insurance payout for Dad's supplemental policy is temporarily frozen. The company received a claim submitted under his file, but they're investigating irregularities. Specifically, potential issues with the signature and beneficiary information. Murmurs erupted around the table. Emily put a hand to her mouth. Mom's knuckles whitened around her glass. Chloe, you don't understand how complicated these things are. I actually do, I interrupted calmly. You filed the claim. You signed off as the contact. You listed Emily as the sole recipient, and you didn't tell either of us. Uncle Mike leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Wait, she listed only. Emily, Mom snapped. She needs the help. Chloe has a job, a life, a place in Denver. Emily choked on her breath. Mom, you did this for me without telling me. You filed something under Dad's name without even asking. Mom tried reaching for her hand. Emily pulled away. Tears filled Emily's eyes, but they weren't the soft kind. They were stunned, gutted. How could you use his name like that? How could you hide this? Mom's voice collapsed into whispers. I was trying to protect you. No, I said quietly. You were trying to control us. Both of us. Mom looked at me, then truly looked like she was seeing my face under a new light she couldn't dim. Why would you do this? She whispered. Why would you go to them? Because they emailed me, I answered, to verify the signature, to confirm that I knew what had been filed. And I didn't, because you never told me. Just like when I was 19 and you pushed those forms in front of me. Mom sank back into her chair, her shoulders caving inward. Aunt Carol folded her arms. "You forged something, didn't you?" "I did not forge anything," Mom exploded. But the outburst was too fast, too defensive, too close to the truth. It was just, "I handled it because Emily's had a horrible year. I thought if I explained everything later, but you weren't going to explain it later," I said. "You were going to let me find out when it was too late." Mom's breath shuddered. "I was going to tell you both." When Emily whispered, "After the money hit my account, after I became the villain in your story instead of your project, that one landed." Mom winced. The room simmered with disbelief. My older relatives exchanged looks. My cousins stared at their plates. No one defended her. For the first time in years, silence wasn't my burden. It was hers. I placed my phone on the table, gently turning the screen toward her. "I didn't come here to humiliate you," I said, "but you made a public announcement about something you had no right to do in private." Mom's eyes reddened. "Everything I did was for this family." "No," I said, keeping my voice level. "Everything you did was to pretend you were holding this family together." Emily stepped back, wiping her face. "I don't want money that came from a lie." Her words cracked something open, not just in the room, but in Mom. You could see it in her posture, in the way her hands finally lowered and trembled openly, instead of defiantly. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. I sighed, not angry, not triumphant, just tired. "You did, but it doesn't have to stay that way." I let the room breathe with that. Let it settle. Let it land. "This isn't revenge," I said. "I just wanted the truth to stop hiding in paperwork." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Aunt Carol reached for my hand under the table. Emily exhaled shakily. "And Mom," she finally bowed her head. That was the turning of the tide, not the shouting, not the accusation, but the simple weight of truth revealed in the one place she never expected to be held accountable. Around that long wooden table in Seattle, the power she'd controlled for years slipped out of her hands. And for the first time, everyone saw exactly who had been holding the family together all along. The days after Thanksgiving felt strangely quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after a storm has already chosen its path. I flew back to Denver with the same overnight bag I'd brought, but something inside me had shifted, like I'd finally set down a weight I had been carrying since I was 19. A week later, the insurance company called. Their review was complete. The payout would not go to a single person. It would be divided the way the original policy intended, equally transparently, without manipulation. The representative apologized for the confusion. I didn't tell him the confusion had never come from their side. Emily called me that night. Her voice was uneven but honest in a way I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. She told me she had confronted Mom privately, that she had returned every attempt Mom made to justify what she'd done. She said she didn't want money born from secrecy, and she didn't want to keep living in a version of our family where guilt was gift-wrapped and handed out as affection. Then she said the words I didn't expect, "Thank you for telling the truth before it swallowed us." As for Mom, the fallout came quickly. Our relatives reached out to me not out of gossip, but out of disappointment. They avoided her for a while, giving her space she hadn't asked for but clearly needed. She sent me a short message, not quite an apology, more like a recognition that her choices had consequences she could no longer ignore. I didn't respond with anger. I didn't respond with forgiveness either. Some things take time and some truths need quiet to settle. What mattered was simple: the lie didn't win, and for the first time, neither did she. In the weeks that followed, I kept thinking about how a single sentence can flip the ground beneath a family. Not the shouting, not the blame, just the truth finally being spoken where everyone can hear it. For me, that sentence changed everything. It didn't fix the past, but it stopped the cycle. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the quietest line is the one that finally breaks the pattern. If any part of my story felt familiar, share yours in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next one.